We got Michigan this week, Josh. It's the last normal race of the regular season. It's a regular oval. It's 2 miles. It's the only two. Next year it'll be the only 2-mile track on the circuit, we think. I don't know where, unless it can find another one.
So you think?
Yeah, I know, because I think Fontana's off the circuit for next year. But I mean, this is it. 2 road courses in Daytona after this. So if you want to get a regular win, this is it.
And it's funny because a lot of the drivers are looking at this one like, that's my shot. That's my shot to get one. And it's going to be an exciting race this weekend. I mean, it's funny. I was looking at the stats for the recent winners. I was like, Kevin Harvick, how many has he rattled off in a row? Or he's won 4 of the last 5 of the last 7. And I know he hasn't won this year. He won at Michigan last year. So I'm looking at him like, it's Kevin Harvick's time to get a win, something like that. But, look at how good Bubba Wallace was there last year. Kyle Larson has wins here. There's a number of drivers, and it almost goes back to our conversation about, who's going to win below the cut line or how many new winners will we get. And, you look at who's good on 2-mile tracks. You look at who's good at Michigan in the past. And you look at who's strong there, and it could shape up to be a pretty exciting race. And you add in the factor that a lot of people are looking at the 2 road courses and Daytona. Some will look at it as like, hey, that's not my forte. So this week I have to be as aggressive as possible and push the envelope as much as possible because this is my shot. That could create for a much more exciting race. And I know that's the situation last year as well, but that's what excites me about it.
Well, Heather, Josh just mentioned Kevin Harvick as the defending winner of this race. The thing I am concerned about for Kevin Harvick is the Fords are still not fast. They're getting better runs, but they're getting better runs at tracks that don't, that are more suited to the higher, downforce that they've got with this new nose, the nose they came up with, where they tried to change their aerodynamics a little bit, and it hasn't worked for them.
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. Although they were fast at Richmond, so I don't know. It seems really interesting to think about how some of the teams have been racing better earlier in the season. And then when we get to these tracks that we've either gone to a second time or later in the year or in the summer months, it's almost like their notes aren't necessarily translating, like for Hendrick, for example. So I'm wondering if it'll have the reverse effect for Fords or stewart-haas, that they weren't doing well in the beginning and then their notes are going to translate a little better, or they're going to run better in the summer season than they were earlier. But I think Kevin definitely has a shot at it. I think he's hungry. So what has he got to lose, right? It's his last season. So go for it. So I think him and Ronnie Childers could, being that they've won there a lot recently, could be pulling out all the stops to make sure it happens again.
Yeah, there is starting to be some concern in the Hendrick camp, especially after their performance at Richmond where Larson dominated in the spring.
Yeah, it is interesting kind of what happened to them this summer and as of late, seeing their struggles, and you're wondering, you're like, well, this team is, out of the gate, you're always like, well, all these guys are going to get a win and be factors and maybe make a run to the championship 4. And, right now you're looking at, Chase and Bowman possibly not making the playoffs, which is crazy to think. They both did miss time this year, and I know that put them behind, but, Bowman really hasn't been a factor as of late. I mean, what was his last top 10 was Richmond in the spring. And then we talked about Chase already. But also some people always talk about the fact that they're like, oh, does Hendrick just kind of like sandbag it in the summer and then they come back to life? And then you look at a couple of weeks ago, you talk about how many wins is William Byron going to get, and he goes through a mini slump. So, things change really quick, and they could change back on a dime this weekend. But it's just a matter of, when is it too late? Because it's getting late fast for Hendrick, for those 2 drivers out of it at least.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, this is one of those things you look at, Heather, and you just say, I'm wondering for those guys that are on that cut line or dancing around the cut line, it's the game now. Do you play for points or do you play for wins? And if you play for points, do you give up your chance for a win?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think you could go either way. I think it just depends on what they feel comfortable doing. I know that some of the truck teams that I was talking to, they were approaching their last race there at Richmond that same way when it came to the cutoff. But like Matt DiBenedetto, for example, his crew chief told me, we're going to run for points. So if it means we have to give up a win, we need to get those points to ensure that we get into the playoffs. So just depending on where they're sitting, depending on how confident they feel in their equipment and how they can perform when it comes to the race, on whether they think it would be beneficial to just get points and play it safe, or kind of play it risky, if you will, and go for wins. But yeah, it's a tough call. I'm really glad I'm not a crew chief or on these teams having to decide these things, because it's a lot of pressure and having to deal with the stress of knowing that you're good at your job, knowing that you know how to set up a race car, but it just not working out, whether it be because of some changes that were made to the package, or what you're finding on the sim isn't adding up when you get to the track. It's just not translating right. Or, like you mentioned, the new nose with the Ford. It's just going through that growing process of learning how the new body is working for you. Like, it's beyond, I don't know, it stresses me out just to even talk about it, let alone have to be the one trying to figure it out.
Yeah, and then you're at Michigan, which, of course, is the home basically for Ford and Chevy, and even more pressure to perform this weekend.